So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. And right now, this week's topic is going to be my actual paid work, which is the Transit Costs Project. Uh, so the Transit Costs Project is a program for figuring out why certain places build. For us, it's going to be urban mass transit, so that would be subways and commuter trains, but you can apply some of the same insights to other kinds of public infrastructure. Why are they so much lower cost in some places than other places? So it's based on 5 very high detailed cases. So Istanbul in Italy, you can click the links, transitcosts.com, and read the case studies. And these are all, and these are both very good examples of low cost, high quality construction. Another case, which is Boston, we did a long time ago. This is a high cost example. There is there's the Stockholm case, which is at this point about 3 hours from completion. Not 3 hours, not literally, 3 work hours from going from third draft to final. And there's the New York case, which requires a little bit more work, but it's all stuff that's going to be, we're talking about days for completion. Probably full publication of everything combined is going to happen sometime in September. So, so again, 5 cases. For some reason, this is for some reason this is something specific. So there's going to be the Stockholm case here, and but it's not just the 5 cases. So we've based this on these 5 very deep cases, but also on just talking to a smattering of people from so many different places. I've talked to, for example, a number of Parisians about the situation in Paris. Now, Paris is a medium cost city. So if you look at this file, it's called Merge Costs version 1.3. Hi, thanks Bernanke. It's going to be kind of weird because the costs are on this side, but the city name is this, and I can just move the costs to be a little. So, for example, okay, so you're not seeing the cost here, so I need to move this a little bit. So you might notice, so the Chinese numbers, they bounce around a lot, but they're basically global median. Istanbul, these are pretty cheap numbers. Global median is 250. All of this is it's kind of a weird current PPP dollars, so adjusted for differences between countries, but not inflation. These are all pretty recent projects on our list. My guess is in 2022 dollars, because of inflation over the last 2 years, global median is going to be 300, maybe a bit more than $300 million a kilometer of underground construction. And this is, as you can see, short of that. In Turkey. And China is just going to be on the global median, maybe a bit less. Hong Kong, as you may be able to, is very expensive. I only have glimpses of ideas of what's wrong there, and a lot of it is based on backfilling from other countries. So I'm not going to be able to tell you why the Tongcheng line extension is literally closing in on $2 billion a kilometer. Taiwan's pretty expensive. Germany, this is kind of a fake note. This is a relatively easy line. Germany is about average. And France is also about average. So it's going to be difficult to find because it's one line. Let me put Grand Paris. Yeah, this one. Grand Paris Express essentially defines the global median. In an earlier version of this database, this was the literal global median when you arranged all of these in descending order of cost per kilometer and weighted by line length, the global median actually was literally this. I don't think it is this any longer, just because again we've added more things and they're a little bit. So this might be a little bit more. I'm not sure, but if it's not the global median, it's within a few percent of it. So France is an example of a medium cost country, and I have talked to a bunch of Parisians, not enough to write a full case, but enough that I could write, instead of, I don't know, 15,000 words, write 3,000 words about what Paris is doing. I've talked to a bunch of Germans. I have talked to more Swedes than that. I think I've talked to 9 Swedes or 10 Swedes and read a lot of documentation. But I've also talked to some Finns, Danes, Norwegians, and maybe interpreted that in context. Dutch people. We had an assistant who was, who, I don't want to call this person Korean because he's not Korean, he's Somali, but he worked in, but he studied and worked in Korea. And I talked to a Filipino planner. So, and I know that, Elif has talked to, while she was researching the Turkish case, she was talking to Turkish people who, thanks to the very successful, very large construction sector within Turkey, who started getting contracts elsewhere. So this is how we got glimpses about things that are happening in Germany or Sweden or Poland. So all of this, again, it's maybe one source per country, but so I'm not going to write an entire spiel about the Warsaw Metro, but it does give me context. So with all of these things together, we can try to figure out the answer to the original question. Why is it that in Turkey we have these really low costs, or in Italy there are these really low costs, or in the Nordic countries there are the costs that used to be very low and at this point are below median but not far below median, sadly, and compare that with the extreme cost of the projects within New York City. Until I added that one Hong Kong line that I highlighted a few minutes ago, these 5 were literally the 5 most expensive in the entire database. I think at this point, the Hong Kong one interlaces between these 3 and these 2. In real inflation-adjusted dollars, it might actually be a little bit behind Second Avenue Subway Phase 1. I'm not sure. So the point is that how come New York is so exceptionally bad? How come Britain? Look at Crossrail. Now, Crossrail is a project that has a reason to be expensive. It does not have a reason to be closing in on $1 billion per kilometer expensive, okay? Yes, London is a difficult environment to tunnel in. Do you know what is also a difficult environment to tunnel in? This city. A city where you can find archaeology that goes back more than 2,000 years. I mean, so can London, but I mean, let's compare the size of London in the, let's say, 1st century and the size of Rome in the 1st century. Think who colonized who. So let's zoom in. So this is the historic forum right between the Palatine and the Capitoline Hills. As you might be able to tell, even just glaring at Google, these are some excavated ruins, and these are considered priceless. So if you're wondering how come in Southern Europe the construction costs are so low, that's not because they bulldoze everything in their path, quite to the contrary. The extent to which they care about the extent to which they care about their historical heritage is, I don't want to say unusual. I imagine any other country with that kind of heritage would do the same. I'm not familiar with the situation of countries that have, let's say, 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old ruins that would just bulldoze them. But Rome was a city of 1 million people 2,000 years ago. New York was not. London was not either. And I bring all of this up because right now, as we speak, there is an under construction line in Rome that goes right through this area. It's called Metro Line C. I don't know how well it is going to be represented in Google Earth, which is a little bit out of date. Let's zoom out of Istanbul for a moment and zoom in on Rome and see if I can find it on Open Railway Map. Now, Open Railway Map does have a problem where you see the colors. You see how the color of a metro is in blue, and then if it's underground, then it's in faded color. Good luck trying to figure out which of these lines are subway. So this is B, but Rome B. This is Rome A. This is then you have Rome B1, which is a branch of Rome B. So you have this kind of branching, and these are still very dense and complex areas, but these urbanized in the 19th century. Then you have Rome Metro C. I think it's this line, and then they're extending it. Okay, they are showing the expansion. So up until here. So there's so the sections are numbered backwards. So it's 6, then 5, 4, then 3, and so this is where they're building the expansion of Line C. So through the Colosseum, the Imperial Forum, Piazza Venezia, and the wedding cake, and now. There is no accounting for taste, so the fact that the wedding cake is kind of fugly does not mean that you can just bulldoze it, and there are other things here that are worth saving, unlike the wedding cake, and so basically all the construction techniques here are going to be incredibly delicate, and as you might imagine, they're going to cost more, because it really does cost extra money to preserve priceless artifacts from 2,000 years ago. So the easy part of Line C is this. Then you look at the hard part of Line C, and it's 400. That's the part that's currently under construction. And again, it's not a long project, it's just an extremely complex one. Because again, you are not using your usual techniques next to the Imperial Forum and Piazza Venezia. That's just not going to happen unless you enjoy bulldozing millennia-old archaeology. And you can ask the same question about Turkey. So here's not Istanbul. There's an S there. So this is Istanbul. I'm going to look at Marmaray. Is there one Marmaray, or no? There are two Marmarays. So Marmaray is two projects, one of which is labeled here BC1, one is labeled CR3. BC1 is the tunnel, CR3 is the surface improvements, because Marmaray, Marmaray is Turkey's Crossrail. Marmaray, I'm sorry, Elif. Marmaray, maybe Marmaray, I don't know if it's better to call Marmaray Turkey's Crossrail, or because of who opened first, called Crossrail London's Marmaray. Marmaray is a regional rail project. And if you're wondering, in our database we do literally have a dummy for regional rail. So see, this is 1 and the others are 0. The reason is that regional rail, or S-Bahn if you will, the idea of an S-Bahn is you take two disconnected, usually commuter lines, and actually Marmaray is going to be a perfect example to show this, just because all the surface lines are very stark on the map and you can see why they're disconnected. So there used to be two completely separate commuter lines, one on the European side, one on the Asian side, there was no rail connection here, because building connections not just across the Bosphorus but across this part's the most sensitive part, because the landfall here is the historic part of Constantinople. So in the same way that Rome was a city of 1 million people 2,000 years ago, I do not think Constantinople was ever that big in antiquity, but I think it was, I want to say 400 or 500,000 during late antiquity. So still an enormous city. The walls of Constantinople, I believe this is what they enclosed. So very large and all. So we're talking about individual buildings that are 1,500 years old. And of course, then in the Ottoman Empire, it was maybe a little more recent, but it was still pre-industrial. So it was again a huge, huge city, 300, 400 years ago. So this is the most sensitive part. And so the road bridges, the older road bridges, would have gone in much easier to build areas. And Marmaray, I mean, there were no railways. The railways are much more city center focused. So they had to connect. So when they had to connect Sirkaji and Haydar Pasha, they had to tunnel here. So the idea is you take these existing lines, you don't build a full metro line from the western suburbs to the eastern suburbs, that is cost prohibitive. So the idea is you only build the difficult parts. This is the idea of S-Bahn tunneling or regional rail tunneling. You use surface line, you use mostly existing lines for most of the system, and then you just build the connections that are required, and generally these will be through city center, the most difficult parts. Now this has a different color here because it's technically mainline rail, so it's orange, not metro and blue. So the advantage is it's easier to see. So here is the route of Marmaray. Again, labeled 1 and not 0 in the database because 0 would be a metro line, which might be in a neighborhood that's still very dense, but maybe 19th century urban or 20th century urban, and not this, which is 4th century. Let alone beneath the channel, which is very deep, earthquake prone. I think there are also strong currents, which is why it's so deep. And so this was an extremely complex project with very complex archaeology. And as a side note, by the way, you can kind of see the different tones if you try to look at how different newspapers covered it. So maybe the more regime newspapers kind of portrayed this as a triumph of showcasing old archaeology, and then maybe the more opposition-oriented newspapers portrayed would point out how it led to a lot of delays during construction. And anyway, that very delayed project, this is how much it cost. Now, yes, this is the dollars of 13 years ago, but the United States has inflation. The United States does not have hyperinflation. 228 from 2009. That's 300-ish right now, maybe a bit more. Now, again, compare that with Crossrail. Now, Crossrail does not go under anything like this. Crossrail has different pain points. So the question is why? How come Crossrail is that expensive? And again, it's not that Crossrail has to go underneath an unusually complex city. I mean, it does, but Istanbul, unusually complex city. I'm not going to be able to see Crossrail well on this, so again, let's go to this slightly jankier, but actually more informative on things built in the last 10 years, Open Rail MI. So Crossrail, or if you will, I think they formally renamed it the Elizabeth line, because London builds so few lines that they actually can just rename them after monarchs forever. And so it's the same trick. You don't build everything. You only build a few tunnels, but these are going to be the most expensive parts, the most expensive per kilometer. So this is Crossrail. It's from Paddington going east-west through city center to Canary Wharf, which being a post-war urban renewal project on what used to be docks, on the Isle of Dogs, is not very well served by rapid transit. And then another branch up to Stratford. It's here. Now again, is this hard to tunnel through? Absolutely. So this bit around Tottenham Court Road, no, not here, this is Ox Circus, here, Dalham Court Road, they even show you in detail how the two tunnels in opposite directions are a little bit divergent. This specific station was called Eye of the Needle, to thread the tunnels between these two lines, because they did not want to go even deeper, because then the vertical axis would take too long. So again, very complicated project. No wonder it is more expensive than the global median. But then the question is, why is it closing in on $1 billion a kilometer? And the answer has to be institutional. So there's something about British institutions, something about American institutions, and if you look at our entire database, it's something about English-speaking country institutions that produces high construction costs. This is this is not the Anglo dummy. This is the Anglo dummy. So column Z on this database, just you might be able to see this is just a dummy that takes a value 1 in countries where the language is English. Now, is the language in Singapore English? I mean, not natively, but in practice, yes. If you want to quibble and say, well, maybe it's just prestige versus low prestige, and first of all, if you're talking about prestige, then Hong Kong has to be added to this, and that intensifies the correlation between this dummy and construction costs, just because Hong Kong is very expensive. And then maybe you want to say, what about India? India is kind of weird because India mostly builds elevated lines. The subways that India does build, like Mumbai Metro Line 3, this is how much that costs. Now, maybe not the cleanest comparison because they built it as a subway, not as an elevated line, and this means that maybe it's going to be more expensive because if this were an easier tunneling environment, let's say a very broad avenue, then this could just be an elevated line. But again, still, India is pretty expensive. Including it would enhance the correlation, and I don't know if the database is going to show me the correlation right the way it's done here, but the correlation between this variable and construction costs, that is, by the way, I said before the global median is about 300. The reason they say the average here is 200, it's because it's including elevated lines, and I'm netting that out. So if you're wondering the correlation between the Z column, so Z2, Z6657, and the dependent variable, why are you not telling? It's 0.5. I believe. What just happened? Oh, control 1 is not format number. Format number. Okay, 0.48. And now let's do another correlation with column J. J tells me how underground or elevated the line is. So I need up to 657, and V is the dependent variable. So note how the correlation with the Anglo dummy variable is stronger than the correlation with whether the line is elevated or underground. A correlation that is very weak, and the reason, by the way, the reason it's very weak is that these variables interact negatively. So very cheap countries just build everything underground. I mean, if you're Milan, okay, yeah, you can have the 1L, but for the most part, if you're Italy, you're just mostly going to build subways, even in cities the size of Catania. And if you're Turkey, again, most are going to build subways. This was old line. And then if you're, and again, Italy, subway. Spain is not entirely, it's mostly subway land. And then you look at really expensive places, usually in developing countries, they will save money by building elevated. Or the United States might save money by building things in the median of a freeway. So this is how whether a line is elevated or underground is going to interact negatively with other construction cost factors. And final analysis, the Anglo dummy 0.48, proportion underground 0.2. Okay, so now you're asking me, Prague, why? And exactly. So I'm focusing on the Anglo dummy because so this is a mixed methods research. Right now I'm just blabbering to you about a database with a couple hundred items, which depending on your field's norms is either going to be huge or insufficient. So if your norms are big data, this is probably not big enough. If your norms are medical, this is amazing. I've heard of papers based on fewer patients than this. Like, I forget whether the paper I'm thinking of that a friend of mine got into PNAS had either 180 patients or 360, 180 control, 180 treatment, and that was that was not about care. That was like about correlates of schizophrenia. And when I talked to the researcher again, as a friend of mine, about this, and the researcher, oh yeah, that like in like biomed, finding actual cases is so hard that this is considered big N. So as I said, what we're doing is very mixed methods. So I can tell you, based on the qualitative part, so that would be to some extent interviews, to a much larger extent reading the reports and reading the discourse in many of these countries and seeing what they're doing, that this dummy variable is actually, Hong Kong is one, okay. Then that this dummy actually matters, and it actually matters. What I mean is, people in not the United States. The United States is somewhat divergent, but people in these other countries look up to London. For example, British consultants get work in Singapore. They get work in Hong Kong. Jay Walder, I believe he's American. I believe he's American and not British. He worked for Transport for London, and then got hired to head, I'm forgetting whether New York City Transit or the entirety of the MTA. And then after he left, he went to work for the MTR in Hong Kong. So you have this kind of hiring network where Singapore and Hong Kong will hire Westerners, and by Westerners I mean specifically Anglo-Westerners. It's also something that is important in Hong Kong discourse about the judiciary. For the first 20 years of Chinese control of Hong Kong, give or take, the presence of foreign judges, and again, these were people with common law world experience, and I don't think any of them was Israeli, so I think British, Australian, New Zealand judges. I don't know if there were any Americans or Canadians. That was considered a really important part of connecting Hong Kong to rule of law. And some of these judges are right now leaving because of the changes in the mainlandization of Hong Kong in the last couple of years. And the contrast is that one of these consultants that I spoke with, she's like, I mean, a bunch of us were on the call. So for example, this British consultant who worked so extensively in Singapore did not work in continental Europe. And it's not out of any kind of snobbishness, it's just continental Europe does not really need to hire British consultants. You see glimpses of this in the Netherlands. You see glimpses of Anglicization. I don't think of the use of consultants, but of how to deal with procurement. We see this to some extent in the Nordic countries, and this is correlating with their increase in construction costs. It's just most of the non-English speaking developed world does not rely on these kind of Anglo-world consultants. Anglo-world consultants, I need to be very clear, are not evil, okay? I mean, I've talked to them. I've talked to many of them. Now, there are people who will tell you are morally repugnant in the sense that they very clearly do not care, that they have a very cynical view of the situation in which their goal is to only maximize their consultancy's return business or anything like that, as opposed to just doing a good job. And again, these people exist, but it's not even a bunch of bad apples spoiling the bunch. The people that I've talked to are just not like this at all. They're very driven. They're very driven to do a good job. It's just somehow wherever they get work, costs are high. And moreover, what we're seeing in the Nordic countries and what we're seeing in the cost history of Canada is that the more you invite them, the higher your costs are. It's not even that maybe there's something else at hand. So a lot of it is, again, something very institutional. And it's institutional specifically about the role of the government, about the role of the civil service, the role of the private sector. And so we have these institutional questions, and I may be portraying this in a very abstract way about the role of the government or the role of the private sector, and you could try to map that to left versus right, but you absolutely shouldn't. In the internal left versus right fights in countries, it's completely irrelevant. So for example, Anglicization in this case of Swedish construction, it's something that's very evident in our work, but and you would expect that this might be right-loaded. Why is it right-loaded? Well, you constantly read left-wing magazines about Sweden, and they constantly complain about how Nordic social democracy is being undermined by globalization, by people who believe that there are things that Olof Palme said that might be incorrect, or by or that it's or is threatened conversely by people who do things that Olof Palme did not say. There's a lot of kind of Palme-necrocracy in parts of the Swedish New Left. So you might expect that a left-wing government would do this differently from a right-wing one. No, it wouldn't. This is not about domestic Swedish left versus right, and I harp on Sweden just because in Northern Europe, and especially in the Nordic countries, we see genuine, very large left-right differences. Now, there are people who constantly complain that they haven't managed to destroy the opposition and therefore there's no difference or something. And again, so for example, these would be New Left people who complain that the Social Democrats have somehow strayed. But then you look at the actual practice and you look at very big differences in economic and social policy that came out of the election of Stefan Löfven. And I mean, Stefan Löfven did not even have a fully left-wing majority. Fully left-wing majorities have existed in the last 20 years, and not in Finland, but in the other three mainland Nordics. And in Sweden, even without a fully left-wing majority, just with a left-dominated majority, serious changes have happened. And again, maybe not 100% of the wish list of the base of the Social Democrats, and then the sort of people who like complaining that they're not left-wing enough, they will find the 2 out of 8 things that they have not accomplished and portray them as the most important things and the other 6 as trifles. But objectively speaking, there is a large left-right difference. It is completely irrelevant, as far as I can tell, to the issue of construction costs. And again, I'm highlighting this in a place where left-right differences on specific matters of policy are very large. So there would be not, let's say, Italy, where the civil servants run the show. Left-right differences on social policy are real. On economic policy, they try, but Italy, the basic problem is that Italy is not facing growth inequality trade-off. Italy, the sort of reforms that the sort of neoliberal reforms that Italy needs are not inequality increasing reforms. They're things like actually make sure that people actually pay the taxes they're due, rather than letting rather than letting family scale businesses dodge taxes. That's not really, it's a neoliberal reform to make sure other people pay their taxes, but it's not like a right-loaded reform. So in Italy, maybe there's a lot of political polarization, but and there are genuine left-right differences on issues of social policy when it comes to issues of Catholicism and religion. Essentially, the reason there's no gay marriage in Italy is that there is a left-wing electoral majority. It's a very narrow one. It might not hold in the upcoming election, but it did in the last one. The issue is that and that counts 5 stars left wing, but 5 star movement generally is not anti-gay. The issue is that there is one small component of the center left, which is Christian left within the Democratic Party. So people are generally left wing on a bunch of issues, except they're against gay rights and probably would prefer abortion not to be legal. And so the result is that so abortion is legal because much of the center right is okay with it. Gay marriage, the center right is not okay with. You map out the factions. There's at this point a small majority in Italy among the political factions in the parliament against it. So there isn't any. So there is on these kinds of matters real left-right differences, but basically anything that involves complex governance, the civil servants run the show. Government, like the political government is less relevant. The only post-war prime minister who's lasted for many years is Berlusconi, and Berlusconi's main agenda is that Berlusconi should personally be made richer. So again, not left-right, but there are things that you can kind of ideologically sort of see them if you squint your eyes. And the part that you need to see if you squint your eyes is the idea that the civil servants are not great. So this is where it comes from. So in Britain, some of it goes back to Parkinson's law. There's this entire idea that the civil servants are self-interested. This in America became public choice theory. There are people who will tell you that public choice theory is a racist theory. It was developed by a white Virginian economist. So there's a book that I have not read that claims that public choice theory. Let me see if I can find public choice theory, racism. Let me see if I can find the book. So this is the book. It's called Democracy in. I believe it's this one, the Democracy in Chains. But by Nancy McLean. So this claims that James Buchanan, the one who developed public choice theory in 1950s, 60s America, specifically it was about schools. So the idea was that civil servants, in this case teachers, were self-interested and unaccountable, and therefore there should be some sort of privatization. This is where the idea of school vouchers comes from. The claim in the book, and I've not read the book, maybe I've read some reviews, but that's not going to make me an expert. Some of them disagree with the book. There's this claim that it was specifically set up as a way of making it harder to racially integrate schools and easier to racially segregate them. Now, in Britain, this theory was also accepted, was not going to be for racial reasons because it's not at all about, for example, school choice for racial reasons. Britain had its own school segregation within the public system on the basis of what was important, which was class. Germany still has that. And so it was not about, so the racial elements were absent, but maybe they still came in. And the issue is that Margaret Thatcher and a lot of the new right hated the civil service. There's a reason that Margaret Thatcher's favorite television show was Yes Minister and then Yes Prime Minister. She was such a big fan that she wrote fanfic. And the actors acted out her fanfic scene. I mean, she's the prime. I mean, when your television show is loved by the prime minister, obviously you will accommodate. This was a TV show that was very acerbic, very cynical in its satire, but it was not adversarial. In the sense that when Barack Obama said that his favorite television show was The Wire, and I'm forgetting whether it was him or his attorney general, who asked if there was going to be another season, and David Simon, who is very adversarial, said, "Yeah, end the drug war. We'll do another season." The people who made U.S. Minister are not that adversarial. They shot the scene. So the idea is that civil servants are people whose only interest is in preserving their own power for very petty purposes. People who are secretive for the sake of secrecy. People who look down on the rest of the public and constantly obfuscate a clique of an elite, of an Oxbridge elite. So, for example, on the show, Sir Humphrey constantly denigrates the minister because Sir Humphrey went to Oxford. The minister went to the London School of Economics. And now I will say that this kind of contempt for the public is traditional to the British civil service. It still exists. It's something specific to a generalist elite that bounces between departments. So it's something that the show depicts very well. And if anything, that's become worse. All these Thatcherite ideas of how to reform the civil service have not been make it subject matter experts. They've been the other way around. It was replace the apolitical generalist elite with the party's generalist elite, the Americans, the thing that the United States. I won't call it the American solution because America has done this before there was an apolitical generalist elite. Very little of the U.S. government was ever an apolitical civil service. Transportation, by the way, was. The Federal Highway Administration, back when it was called the Bureau of Public Roads, was an early example of apolitical civil service, for which the main, for which the person most responsible is a guy named Thomas MacDonald, very flawed and fascinating character. This was such a success, American road building, not the interstates. I mean, were successful in the sense that a lot of people ride in. They were horrifically expensive, but the pre-interstate construction, when MacDonald was in charge, was very cost-effective, and it influenced, for example, Sweden. But most of the United States was run on the basis of political appointees. I don't think Yes Minister is the neoliberal propaganda. I think of it as just public choice propaganda. There's no, so I mean, yes, the private sector is portrayed more positively than the public sector, but the private sector is still portrayed, so for example, in Yes Minister, the two examples that I'm thinking of about how the private sector is, the private sector is portrayed more positively, are that in the feminism episode, the one about the minister trying to promote women, after everything fails, he at least wants to promote one woman in the civil servant who he encounters, who is very competent, and she feels so outraged at the tokenism that she leaves to work for the private sector, which she insists is better. The authors. It's not just the authors not. It's not exactly a matter of neoliberalism. The authors have very silly views of British politics, I mean, you can match them to neoliberalism, but only through Thatcherism. Like in cases where neoliberalism says one thing and Thatcherism says another, I don't think they're neoliberals. And again, it's just public choice. So they're portraying the public sector as venal in ways that the private sector isn't, but they're also portraying the private sector as very stupid sometimes. For example, there's this character of a banker who, so in the NIMBYism episode where the minister wants to deny a bank permission to build a building 6 floors higher, and and the finance person and the banker who represents that business manages to lobby Sir Humphrey to manipulate the minister into permitting not 6 stories but 9. That banker is portrayed not as venal. He's portrayed as actually needing that. He's portrayed as very stupid. Like he's shown, for example, reading with the Financial Times. It's part of the uniform. I don't actually read that. Or he overtly says he doesn't know any economic theories, and confused John Maynard Keynes with Milton Friedman. I think he called them Milton Keynes or something. So, and again, he's a banker. So again, the private sector is often portrayed as dumb, but the public sector is portrayed as having no focus and not actually doing anything. And at any rate, this matches the cost origin of the United Kingdom. Okay, British costs were not especially high in the 60s, or they were starting to rise in the 70s, and then in the 90s they exploded. Now, there was so London built the Victoria Line in the 60s, the Jubilee in the 70s, and the Jubilee extension in the 90s. In between, it didn't build any major subway. It did build the Docklands Line Railway, but that was, but that's an elevated line. So, I can't tell you that this is exactly what happened in Britain. The timeline matches, but it is imperfect because the costs were starting to rise beforehand with the original Jubilee line. But the timeline does match. And you can see this kind of discourse, something that's, again, maybe not Thatcher herself. Again, Thatcher hated the civil service, but a lot of the privatization of the state to consultants is post-Thatcher. There's this idea that the private sector is more innovative, and so if you're Maggie, what you do is you just take a hammer and knock out the teeth of people who are involved in government. So that would be things like firing unionized workers just because you hate workers. There would be things like austerity for its own sake, almost. Like, I mean, the United States had the Volcker shock, but it ended in 1982. Britain stayed on this until 1986. So it's stuff that's often increasing inequality because they think that high inequality is good because rich people are more morally deserving. And this is different from actual neoliberalism, by which I mean something like John Major, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair. Things like, oh, well, the government is not bad, but it should be more like the private sector. And somehow it doesn't mean hire your own people at competitive salaries. It always means outsource the state to private consultants. And that is the Anglo problem. Now, concretely, what does this mean? So, concretely, we can try to draw a distinction between, let's call it, traditional and modern procurement. Now, it's not just going to be a problem with procurement, but procurement is very glaring. I do not know the exact impact of procurement problems in the United Kingdom or Canada or Singapore or whatever. But in New York, I do, because one of the people involved in capital construction told me, and broke it down to me, that bad procurement rules double the costs. Now, New York is unusual that the traditional system didn't work there either. But elsewhere, the traditional system worked, and it was replaced by, let's call it, the modern or the globalized system. And what is the traditional system and what is the globalized system? So the traditional system is as follows. It is something called design, bid, build. The equivalent in the margin is design, build, something called design and build. Design, bid, build means you do two contracts. The first contract is for the design of a project. Then the public agency owns that design and contracts with builders to build it. Design build means that you do both at the same time. So the public agency will contract, but necessarily a larger private entity, a larger private contractor, to do both the design and the construction. This is supposed to be more flexible. This is supposed to unleash private sector innovation. This is also purely ideological in its use in the Anglosphere, to the point that in Toronto, I'm gonna see if I can find the Toronto poetry. Toronto, Steve Vance, Madrid, Ross. And I'm also only about 80% sure that I said is it Stephen Conlan, maybe? Am I not? I'm just not remembering. Yes, Steve Monroe, right there. Yes, when I get someone's name wrong, I will not be able to find them on Google. Okay, so this is a good link because Toronto saw that Madrid was building at far lower costs than Toronto, in fact, lower than everywhere. And it's an accident that we did not even study Madrid. The reason we did not study Madrid in all our 5 cases is that we already found 2 amazing people. One of them is Elif, the other is Marco, to study, among other things, things in their home countries, Turkey and Italy. And we didn't want to repeat Spain because from preliminary work we realized that Spain was going to be a lot like Italy, and to some extent also like Turkey. So instead, for the other low-cost example, we did Sweden. But I have talked to some Spaniards and I've read a lot of things that they've written. So, for example, so the Canadians realized this 15 years ago, and they talked about the construction costs. And for example, so again, they look at and various differences, and some of these are real, and some of this is complete hogwash. And you might notice. So here are their. So here's the modern system. So the TTC plans to incorporate changes in their projects based on the Madrid experience. These include using design-build contract, placing the onus for detailed design on the builder, also conceivably the private partner, rather than the traditional TTC approach of extensive detailed design before a shovel even goes in the ground. Madrid does not do design-build. This is not something that only I know. This is something that the people first heard of the Madrid miracle. This is 2008. Look at the date on the post. Let me see if the one link that everyone goes to is... okay, so there's the UK Madrid tour, which I hope has not link rotted. It has link rotted. I love the internet. So instead of that, let me just show you Tunnel Builder. This is a book with a bunch of chapters of which the rest are just technical drawings. This is the interesting one. Look at this URL, put it in. This was written by Manuel Melis Mainar. He's I think this point retired professor of engineering, who talks about how to build things. Let me move my face because the writing is on the right. Finally, the serious issue of the interference between the designer and the construction works was considered. The designer of each contract was never allowed to interfere with the construction of that contract. Experience has shown that a tunneling project is always incomplete. Blah, blah, blah. They do not do design build in Madrid. Here is what Canada said after visiting Madrid and trying to learn from its example. Yes, this is ideological. This is so the traditional system is design bid build. The modern is design build. The traditional system is itemized contracts, also used in Madrid, not just in Madrid. They are used in Italy. In fact, also the items are fully public and specified. In Turkey, it's a mix of fixed price and itemized. Sweden is a mix, but it's traditionally mostly itemized. Yes, they have a form of oversight. It's called an in-house public servants. It's called in-house public servants. Trained engineers. In Spanish culture, engineering has very high prestige. Ditto Portuguese culture. I believe ditto Italian culture. Moreover, public sector engineers have the most prestige. They get paid more than the private sector. So they make sure to hire very competent people. You don't need a huge team. I mean, you need a lot of engineers for routine things, but but for design review, you don't need an enormous team. and then they look, and once you have an in-house design review team, a lot of things are very easy to do. For example, you can read over the proposals and technically score them. Now, technical scoring is very important in procurement. You do not want to do lowest price. There's one good place that does lowest price, and that is Turkey. In Turkey, the way quality control is done is different. The quality control in Turkey is they are engaging in so much construction, so much, public and private sector. I've heard the expression constructocracy about the Erdogan regime, which is unfair to call it even an Erdogan regime, even though there were people protesting that, because the opposition is no different. The opposition in Turkey at this point is in control of the municipality of Istanbul. They build. They're not NIMBY. They compete with AKP about who gets to build more. No, it was not talking about the conflict between the high-level design team. No. What he's saying is that the contractors are allowed. Is that there's design. The design is then bid out to building contractors. The building contractors can make small modifications, and if the design team says no, this is not what we said, the design team is not even allowed to say that. I mean, they can say it privately. The contractor does not need to listen, and it will be unlikely to even hear of that criticism. So again, traditional is design bid build, modern is design build. Traditional is itemized. Modern is supposed to be lump sum, because that way the contractors can come up with their own savings. Generally, traditional means more public sector oversight. Modern means less. Traditional means smaller contracts overseen by mid-level civil servants. Modern means large contracts that can be executed by international firms. This is driven by consolidation in the industry. You don't have 12 big companies, or 12 companies at all, that can do tunneling in Sweden. You have 12, or even more than 12, in Europe, but a lot of them will be multinationals, so you need to not expect everyone to speak Swedish. In fact, even 15 years ago, construction sites did not speak Swedish. There were so many immigrants that a construction team might be maybe in English if they're Irish, but it might be in Polish, it might be in Romanian, it might be in Slovak. It might even, at this point, I wouldn't say it might be in Arabic, but my understanding is that the Syrian refugees just do learn the language, they settle permanently, whereas the EU immigrants just move around and don't. And a lot of the management is done in English, and you need to be comfortable with that. Because Sweden is a country of 10 million people, and to grow with modern scale, it cannot just have its own domestic teams. So this is why they're trying to entice bigger firms, bigger multinationals, through making the contracts bigger. That is to say, divide a project between fewer, bigger contracts. And so this is also part of the modern system. There's this emphasis on private sector innovation as opposed to public sector innovation in the modern system. And the modern system, parts of it don't really matter, like design bid build versus design build. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can do design build as long as you have it. Let me put it this way. An in-house team that can oversee design bid build can probably also oversee design build and vice versa. The problem with design build is what happens when you do it as a kind of solution to not wanting to have your own in-house design review team, because that is hiring civil servants, and this means that you're committing to hiring in the public sector, and this means you cannot commit to drowning the government in a bathtub the way that some American right-wingers want. And so when you do that, yeah, no shit, you're going to have less public oversight, and it's going to suck. And the adoption of this kind of modern system, again, maybe not the design build part aspects, but New York has long used lump sum. New York never had New York had a lot of planners and engineers at the MTA, but America never built the apolitical civil service that Europe built, or that rich Asia built. So it wasn't so much as privatizing the civil service in the United States, never having bothered building it. Yeah, exactly. So in New York, their adaptation is so the American adaptation to everything is red tape. So you send hundreds of questions to people who are more competent than you. So first of all, they're going to hate you because your questions are going to be dumb. Second, often this means the style of American regulation is either precise rules, which are overly exacting and then nobody can deal with them, or even worse, this is more a suggestion than a question. This is the kind of thing that's called design review in housing as opposed to in procurement. In procurement, design review means a public servant who can check who can read over what the design is, and I will get to low bid in a sec. Low bid is bad. You want to technically score, but that's not part of the modern system versus traditional. The big consultants are actually like the idea of having not low bids but technical scoring because they like competing on quality and not price. And yes, another American. So there's an American problem and also a British problem in that soft costs are insanely high. There's not a lot of blue collar productivity in the United States, but the white collar productivity is just shit. The soft costs, so things like planning, design, legal, things like that. In Italy, I believe they add, I want to say about 10%, if that, sometimes single digit percent. I just saw itemization of a British electrification project where all of the non-hard costs combined double you. I believe it's about 50% extra from soft costs and about 50% extra from contingency. You should not have 50% contingency, you should have 20%, maybe less. 20% is for tunnels, less for things like electrification. Because contingencies will just murder you because once the money is allocated in the budget, it will just be spent. How much of the soft cost increase? Not actually that much. I mean, yes, white collar salaries in the United States are higher than in Italy, but there's so much red tape. There's so much that just gets bounced between different departments. For example, and I'm going to get to this a bit later, but lots of supervisors from different agencies in the same panel. So the modern system, again, you can. The issue is not design build or design build. It's really you need to have sufficient size teams of expert civil servants doing. Let's call it transport design review because again, there's housing design review, which is a bunch of people who think they're regulators. They're not. They're community members who nitpick every housing design, not because the housing designs are bad, but because they want to have opinions. And thus makes everything a nightmare to work with. So there's a thing where American contractors keep saying things like the MTA factor, the MBTA factor if it's Boston, the sound transit factor if it's Seattle. And what this factor is always the same. It's a nightmare to do business with these agencies because it's either informal nudges like, can you please do this? And you don't need to just look into this with the understanding that if you keep saying no to things, then they will call you difficult and you will not get contracts again. Nudges are, to be very clear, again, they're made by people who have no expertise in this whatsoever. Okay, these are not nudges that are made by Melis. These are not nudges that are made by Isabel Padro, the former head of ADIF, the one who currently became the permanent undersecretary of the Ministry of Transport in Spain. It's not experienced engineers who have built successful projects. It's people who are either political appointees or agency heads who've only built bad projects. I think actually Americans understand that consultants cost more than FTEs. The issue is that consultants can be scaled up or down very easily, whereas FTEs usually formally, but even when not always informally, are a commitment to spending money in the long term. And if you're Charlie Baker, the most harmful person in Massachusetts right now, and yes, I'm aware that there are certain Harvard professors and MIT professors who are objectively horrific human beings. Charlie Baker is the most harmful person in Massachusetts right now. He does not like the idea of committing in the long term to increasing government spending. only to decreasing it, and this is pathological. Like if you need to commit publicly to hiring a couple more bus dispatchers so that you're not going to have to have buses that are so bunched that you're going to have to pay many times that in overtime to bus drivers, that's still a commitment, and so it is not done. So again, American regulation is either this horrifically red tapey set of rules or this horrifically nitpicky set of nudges, as opposed to just hiring experienced engineers to do design review. And again, procurement. And so because of the nightmare factor, and then you have a bonus factor, which is nobody wants to do business with these agencies because it's such a nightmare that not a lot of contractors will even bid. So if there's no competition, the profits are higher. That's another extra cost. There's lots of risk. Another important, a really bad part of the modern system, probably the worst, is not even lump sum, even though that's also bad. It's placing the onus for cost overruns on the private sector. And this is bad. The onus should be on the public sector, because the private sector will just respond by bidding higher. If a private contractor is on the hook for cost overruns, especially in a place where they know that it's a nightmare to deal with the agency and there's going to be a lot of caprice involved, they're just going to bid higher. And then there's a change order process, which someone is screwing someone else always. If it's the private sector, well, yeah, the public sector got screwed. But if it's the public sector, the city, again, gets a reputation as a place that screws over contractors, and contractors don't want to bid there. So this is why you itemize it. The reason you itemize, and again, it's in this link. The reason you itemize it makes it very easy to do little changes. No tunneling project should be contracted under a fixed lump sum contract. It was and still is the author's opinion that it is scientifically possible with complete geotechnical information, even with the use of a pilot tunnel. So it's called fixed price with a bill of quantities, so it's itemized, but there's a fixed cost that the items are supposed to sum to. This is also what is done in Sweden. I think it's called fixed price with either with a bill of quantity or with itemization. Yeah, the unions are a different thing, but so the issue is you have these kind of procurement problems. Again, part of it is the idea is that certain things are more modern, and these things, maybe they're more modern because London uses them and London has cachet. London, remember at the start, how expensive it is to have built it's not fully open, the Elizabeth line, this, it's on 2021, 2022, but I mean, same cost. This, yeah. Do not imitate this. Do not imitate a place that is this expensive. Imitate places that are cheap. And the thing is, this also allows to fill out, yes. You can do it through pre-qualification, which is really bad for letting upstarts in, which is what New York does. So it's kind of a hermetically sealed oligopoly. But yes, the fact that you have public numbers is really important. Britain and the United States have cultures of opacity. The Freedom of Information system, for example, is a really good way of hiding information because the member of the general public is required to affirmatively ask for something specific. It's not even going to be in public. And it gets to the point that there are these kind of harassment freedom of information requests. For example, academics are public servants if they work for a public university, which nearly all are. So that we have these kind of stupid freedom of information style requests. Send us a list of all textbooks that you have used and why you've added or subtracted any in the last however many years. This is something that actually just happened in Britain by people who think that universities are too woke. And the silly thing is, academia does not. So the administration academia works on the principle of hating the entire world, but the talent in academia doesn't work on the principle of hide the most from the public. These syllabi are all already public. These things should be public. The itemized costs should be public. In New York, they're not. In Boston, they're not. In America, they're trade secrets. The agency is allowed to see them, but the general public is not. Do I know what? I don't know. Public servants are relevant, but in the Netherlands, it's like in the United Kingdom, the uppermost layer of civil servants are deliberately made to be generalists and not specialists. They're required to move between departments to prevent professionals from having too much power, which works exactly as well as you would expect. Seattle seems to have lower cost, not anymore. Seattle was lower cost for Ulink, and yes, this is what, but their later projects are a lot more expensive. Things like Ballard, West Seattle, that plan, this is where it is. So I reserve the right to be a little out of date on this. This is from January of 2021, the entire plan that I'm relying on, but it is 650 per kilometer on a line that is majority not underground. And again, I don't remember the overrun. I'm just saying what the costs were as a snapshot in time in early 2021. I'm forgetting if it's had an overrun since. I believe they've also made more of this underground at the same time, so maybe the unit cost will not have changed. But the unit cost is so terrible that, I mean, this can be on budget and it's going to be terrible. It can go 50% below budget and it will still be bad. I don't know, but I will tell you that it's something that is constantly common in North America. A city looks good and its next project sucks. LA was there 20 years ago. Vancouver was, but that's part of the Canadian explosion, or Calgary, same Canadian explosion. On a regulated private sector scale, where California is California. The purpose of government is to move money to private contractors through change orders. California does not know how to do change orders well. It does not know how to technically score projects. So the technical scoring is only 30% of the total. So California does technically score, but it's only 30% of the weight of a bid, and there's not enough. It needs to be at least 50, ideally much more. It's 70, counting speed as part of that in Spain. In France, it's 60. And then because it's not properly itemized, the change orders are very contentious. So it's the same. It's the usual bullshit with risk. This is how procurement literally doubles your costs. Then you have soft cost issues. Then you have soft costs coming from interagency bullshit. They come from a lot of red tape. They come from replacement of a lot of public sector functions by how much is it percentage speed? Spain is 50% technical score, 20% speed, 30% cost, but speed is usually bundled into technical scoring elsewhere. For example, in Italy, they don't have speed as a separate item, but there's the technical score, and also life cycle costs are part of cost in Sweden. So, for example, in Sweden, a cost is not a cost. A bid is in the most complex cases 50-50 between cost and value, but the cost is life cycle. So if you're using, so it's not just capital costs, but also future operating costs. So again, throw away the modern system. It's not very good. Just look at what low-cost places do. These are not the sort of places that British consultants get work in. Think why. That's procurement, probably the most important. Again, factor of 2 in New York. I imagine also in the rest of the United States, the problems that I was told, nearly all of them are pan-American, pan-US, I shouldn't say pan-American. Then you have issues with, again, soft costs, very low white-collar productivity, very high overhead charges, Yeah, exactly. But I mean, life cycle cost is like the easiest thing. I mean, in Sweden, life cycle costs are a separate thing in the procurement regulations uh, from best value. Best value is not just cost or life cycle cost, but also um, do we think this is a technically sound proposal? So so this kind of inflexibility in procurement doubles your costs. Again, then you have white collar overstaffing in the United States. You also have blue collar overstaffing, which is mostly a New York special. Here's a big labor difference. It's not the standards. It's not the. I mean, the wages are downstream of what I'm about to say. In Sweden, and let me see if I find the source. I believe it's here. In Sweden, so they're complaining about a certain race to the bottom, but the wages they're mentioning are not low. Summary of the composition of the workforce, reference data, and let's do city Bonnen because it's actually within our purview. Let's sort of do page 47. Skilled workers construction 90 90 and then 90 to 150 per hour. And this is but skilled worker, but it's not the most skilled trades trades worker. In the trades, it's more than this. In the trades, for example, it's things that are a little bit higher, like maybe 200-ish. For building workers, the lower rates are for things like cleaners, and the miners, what would be called sandhogs in the United States, I think are up to 270, and all of these are numbers from. All of these are numbers are from about 15 years ago. So if you instead inflate to today's, so this is for service workers. They're the only ones who are getting a meager $17 an hour in the prices of 15 years ago. So today, 25-ish. The kind of very heavy, very difficult work that is kind of emblematic of like traditional working class dirty jobs, things like physical construction, mining, things like that. They don't get paid 150 an hour. They get paid based on that source I just showed you, 270. So that would be a bit more than $30 an hour. As of the late 2000s, today it would be more like $40 an hour, maybe a little more. I've heard that present-day wages for miners in Sweden go up to 70k kronor a month. That's a little less than $90,000 US dollars a year, I believe. So it's in PP terms. So again, substantial wages. No, they don't get pension benefits. They get social security, often by their home countries. It's a very heavily, not heavily, it's, that link says it's 45% immigrants, 100% domestic migrants, if they're not immigrants. So again, a very mobile workforce, a workforce that, again, is paid well. Sweden is a rich country. Turkey is a poor country. Turkey does not pay, Turkey does not pay $40 an hour to mining workers. Try 15, and the benefits are more meager. But maybe Turkey, as a poor country, has contracting costs because these are because of subcontracting, and so in the United States, a lot of it is the benefits. Benefits generally double the base cost, or almost double, and the same is true in Sweden, because maybe these are temporary workers and they need temporary housing, and the better off ones get pretty nice rooms. That they get nice hotel rooms. I'm not saying they get 5-star hotel rooms, but they get nice hotel rooms while they work in Stockholm, a city they do not live in. And so there is that kind of issue of wages, but it's not, I mean, think about it. Sweden is not a lower wage country than the United States. It's definitely not lower wage for unionized blue collar labor. And yet, the sound dogs in New York don't earn 90K a year. They would think of it as a poverty wage. They earn, I think, 200. And the issue is specifically it's a very local union. So one kind of worker, in this case, New York City Sandhogs. It's a union that's very clannish. You essentially need to be family member or friend of a member to get in, because working class people don't get 200K a year, even for a sandhog job, unless they maybe are willing to work in northern Alaska in winter. So yeah, sure, oil rig workers get paid a lot in Alaska in winter. And so the wages, and again, it's not that working class wages in New York are very high. They're not. But it's something specific to a bunch of to a bunch of unions that are extremely local. These are all New Yorkers. These are not. I mean, a Mississippian or a West Virginian cannot come to New York and say, "Hi, I heard that you have high working class wages. Please give a job." They will never get it. These unions are very closed like that, and the unions like it. They like it. They think it's somehow camaraderie to have like a close knit group that is against universal health care, because then people might not want to join the union for the health benefits. So again, it's an institutional thing about like a very small number of very ossified unions that have high wages, especially high privileges, a lot of worker control of shifts. For example, American workers in operations sort themselves into. I will get to this in a sec. So workers sort themselves into schedules. For example, for train drivers and bus drivers in the United States, the workers pick in seniority order, and they get so they get to pick in seniority order, and there's a system of overtime, resulting in some senior workers deliberately picking very delay-prone trains and buses for the overtime. The idea of this kind of overtime system is unknown in Northern Europe. You do not get overtime; you get paid per hour or per month. And per month, it means that the hours will be kept roughly constant. In operations, this means management sets your schedule. You're bundled with a certain group of other people, and in a rotation that spreads the bump shifts, like night shifts, across everyone equally. I believe it's going to be one night shift a month. So the wages are constant. It's a working class wage. It's a comfortable working class wage. It's a working class wage. It's not there's not going to be a shortage of workers, or if there is, it's going to be at 2/3 the wage of New York, even in Munich, a city that is about as rich as New York. Okay, so you're talking about overstaffing. So yes, this is a thing, but it's not just the blue collar labor. So you may have heard a number, which is 24 or 22 workers in a TBM in New York versus 9 in Spain or 12 in Germany or something like that. That's like only a slice of it. It's all of the sets of numbers are much higher. New York is overstaffed by a factor of 2 to 3, but the overstaffing is an even higher factor for white collar supervisors, because each agency insists on having its own supervisor in the tunnel. And again, soft costs. Soft costs constantly kill you. You can't just work around a gas pipeline or a power cable, and again, culture of lack of transparency in New York, and this means that if you ask them, okay, we're not going to touch your steam lines, just tell us where the steam lines are. Tell us where the steam lines are. Where are the steam lines? Sorry, we can't tell you because it might be used by terrorists. It's literally that petty. It's just people who are being secretive for the sake of being secretive. The idea of transparency is viewed to them as a disaster, and or even inconceivable. And so a lot of this is this kind of toxicity between different agencies, and get to the point that practically none of them are the managers good at this. Thanks, Mark. You're asking me about whether it's industrial unions or workplace-based unions, and it doesn't really matter. So first of all, in New York, these are not workplace-based unions. If you're, let's say, a unionized electrician in New York, you're not a unionized electrician working for someone. You're a unionized electrician, and then a business has to be, and a business can hire union or non-union electricians, and if they hire non-unions, they will basically never have the state on their side for anything. So they will, for example, never be able to get contracts. They will never be able to. Federal, state, local. If they need to do any kind of construction, they will never get a rezoning or a permit. Even if they somehow manage to do something, there will be protests. So, if you're a union, so these are actually sectoral unions in New York. The issue is that they're sectoral specifically to New York. These are not national unions. These aren't even state unions. These are local unions. The problem is that the United States has a much less commoditized and much more fractionalized labor market than the EU. The EU is much better at this than the United States. The United States has all of these bespoke regulations. Things are usually very petty, and it's not even a union versus no union. I mean, again, New York is the union town, Boston is the union town, San Francisco is the union town. Union members can't just move between them and keep any of their union perks. So it's not even but it's only for union towns. No, it's not. I mean, it's very local. So that's a big problem in the United States. It needs to be broken. There's also the issue of unions ideologically having always favored shop floor control. So again, this is where you get these seniority systems, and this is not historic. It's something that is ongoing. A few years ago, I read about adjunct professors in the United States trying to unionize. I'm forgetting where. I think it was at Columbia, maybe. And in some places, I don't know if Columbia, they've succeeded. And I know what the demands are. First of all, the demands are never more money. The demands are benefits. It's kind of weird because individually workers constantly go for more money and not more benefits. And unions always go for the opposite in the United States. The other issue is that so they demand benefits and they demand a seniority system. So that example of the adjunct professors, they demanded a seniority system in which the more senior adjunct professors would be able to have more control over their teaching schedule, essentially at the expense of junior members and realistically future union members. So you have this kind of labor aristocracy in the sense that it's very fractional. So if you're in a very rich city and you're already a union and you're already in, you're doing really well, and then just can't get in if you can't. If you're outside. And labor gerontocracy, favoring the most senior members. And again, neither of these things exists within the European Union system. But no, it's not about sectoral unions. This is something that can exist even with sectoral collective bargaining, which is actually not a bad thing. The sectoral, it's kind of nice that the only itemized costs that they have with any reliability in New York are the wages, because there's sectoral collective bargaining, so I can see what the wages for, let's say, the electricians or the carpenters or the masons are, and basically everything else is hidden behind NDAs. So there's kind of lots of transparency, and again, blue-collar overstaffing and unions are probably, in the most extreme case, that is to say New York, probably should not be doing this, but the white-collar overstaffing is so much more pervasive because of all these soft costs. And this includes in the tunnel, but also not in the tunnel. It's just a lot of paperwork bullshit. And again, a lot of it is just stuff that can't even be properly assigned. It's just a matter of, let's say, toxic relations with the utilities. A contractor needs to ask about a cable line, about some kind of cable that they hit when they broke the street build foundations for something, the power company will take 6 months to respond. It's so bad that in Boston, so as I keep reminding people, I'm working in this organization, Transit Matters, where you can't have access to the Slack, obviously, it's private, but even if I didn't care about the privacy of my fellow volunteers at TM, I couldn't even show you that because Slack no longer works on my computer. And I would demonstrate, but on the off chance that today is the day it does work, I don't want this to, yeah. So we have a lot of these projects. So we have things about how to do in-motion charging on buses in lieu of just, so you can see these are trolley buses as opposed to just batteries. Regional rail might actually be our biggest one. Again, more buses, fare integration, and mobility hubs. So let's click on mobility hubs. This is the example of utilities. So let's look beyond this kind of graphic of this kind of urban renewal type graphic. So a mobility hub is a nice way of saying bus stop with amenities. So let's look at the amenities at this bus stop. So bike share, garbage can that is definitely just judging by its size includes recycling. So people don't throw trash on the street. Bike parking, perhaps, a little bit of that, and most importantly, a bench and shelter. By far the most important part of the street is this part. Okay, it's also nice to put bike share at the bus stops, but so the mobility hub, and also something that's not very visible, but it's also part of the mobility hub, is to literally put a static poster with directions to points of interest. Now, how much does it cost to do this? Now, this self-fund, now bike share systems are supposed to be profitable through advertising. They often are. I don't know if Blue Bikes is, but I know that. But I mean, private contractors do that. And I mean, and I don't mean as PPPs. Maybe it's PPPs, but they make money off of the advertising. So the actual cost of this is zero. What's the cost of this? Well, I've seen quotes in various parts of the United States about 10 to 15K. This is how much it costs to do the bench shelter. And that also includes a little screen that tells you when the next bus comes. Here they're talking about 50, not 15. Why? Because the screen that I mentioned, the one that tells you when the next bus is, that requires electricity. And they're so afraid of dealing with the utilities because the exact same toxicity of New York also exists elsewhere in the United States, that breaking open the sidewalk in order to get to the power line and tap into that requires so much more coordination that it's too much of a headache. So the idea is to get some solar panels, and that sun doesn't always shine, and get batteries so that you're going to get a little bit of off-grid solar just to power your next bus screen. If you're wondering why that happens, it's because of problems with utilities, or perceived problems with utilities. So there's the utilities problem, there's the procurement problem, lots and lots and lots of white-collar overstaffing. Also, let's be fair, lots of blue-collar overstaffing. Not that I'm aware of. You would expect that in newer cities it would be better, but it's not. I've heard that as an excuse for why San Jose is building deep underground stations. And so speaking of San Jose, let's get into our last topic. So we talked a lot about this kind of ideology of public versus private sector. I've talked a lot about procurement, which I think is the single most important thing. I've talked about white-collar overstaffing, interagency stuff, utilities, labor. Let's talk about design. We don't need this, we don't need this. In Rome, the size of a dig for a station, it can be cut and cover, or it can be, in the most extreme cases, mind. Remember the line I showed you before, MC? This is London, so let's go to not London, but Rome. Or in general in Italy. So these digs have to be mined because it's that or damage to priceless antiquities. The dig is about 15% longer than the length of a train. Why? Because you do need a little bit of extra space for overrun, for staging. It's okay, 15% extra. Why can't JC Decode just do this in the EU? So remember that here in Euroland we have half the station density as the United States, but also when you do it in a normal coast, so when you don't have this utility bullshit like 10 to 15k per station, the return on investment on this is such that you should be doing this probably at every station gets at least 2 riders a day. Like it's like bus shelter is an enormously underrated thing in the United States. Also in Europe, to be honest, I have seen just poles without shelter and bench. Even in rich parts, like I've seen this in Dachau. Okay, the utilities don't. Okay, let's say that Con Ed is less abusive to New York. Do you think New York is going to be less abusive? Like, why does Con Ed care? I mean, like, I mean, the investors don't care. Maybe they care in the abstract, but I mean, they're not going to exercise pressure. The civil servants are never going to get fired for this. Why be nice? Like in the United States, potted plant behavior is rewarded because any kind of behavior that is proactive might lead someone to yell at you for doing something out of line. The American system of regulation is the regulations make everything impossible, and then you're supposed to petition to be an exception. The idea that the regulations actually work for you, that the state works for you, that is anathema in American governing ideology. And it's not a left-right thing. Adversarial legalism was invented by the left. It gets to the point that a Republican Congress might still collaborate with the administration making things better because the Republicans hate NEPA, the law for environmental impact reviews, somehow even more than they hate depoliticized administration. Anyway, in Rome, stations are 15% longer than platform. In New York, 100%. Twice as long. So 72nd Street on 2nd Avenue subway, and here I'm gonna just tell you where it is, and where 86th Street is, because that's where the exits are. So, I believe 72nd is the low part. This is not 72nd. Oh, they actually are depicting this here. Nice. So I believe the exits are here and here. So you would so platforms on the numbered lines, not the numbers, the letter lines, except the L and the J and Z, are 10 cars. The car is 18 meters. Yeah, but remember that NEPA. I mean, NEPA is a problem, but NEPA is not the problem. But it's a problem. A platform is 180 meters. This is 180 meters. The actual size of the dig is about 330. Like, there were shafts on 69th Street. Now it doesn't mean that it was this long, but the overall dig was 330, was I believe 330 meters, and 86th Street, or maybe it was, I don't remember. And one of these two stations, the dig was 400 meters, and the other it was 330. For 72nd, they wanted to blast crossovers that they didn't really need. 86th Street has back of the house space. Basically, there's a lot of space. So they build these horrifically complex mined stations. These are not cut and cover stations. So Second Avenue, look how wide ass it is. I mean, I know who. It's not just full length mezzanines. If anything, the full length mezzanines interact negatively with the issue of back of house space. The mezzanines, again, they're not necessary, but yeah, that's literally this. They're trying to fix NEPA, but even if that bill fails, something that just fixes NEPA might happen because, again, the Republicans don't like NEPA. And at any rate, so at 86th Street, they have all this back office space. So the idea is that you're not just digging a subway station, you're mining it. Normally, subway stations are not mined. They're built cut and cover, even on bored lines. You try to bore as shallowly as possible, I think 15 meters, maybe 20. You don't want to go below that. I think this is 25 because something about the rock. But you want to go 15 meters or something like that, and then dig down 15, maybe 20 meters. 20 meters by length of platform, which in New York would be 180. If you want to be like Rome, it's going to be 200 with a little bit of extra overrun. And then width, you probably need about 20, which is very easy. This is 30 building to building. 20, 200s, 80K cubic meters. The actual dig depth, the actual dig volume is twice that. Because so not only is it mined, which makes everything already much more expensive. Forgetting by how much, I want to say it's maybe 50% extra mining a station rather than covering it, maybe more. Putting in perspective, these stations were about 700 million. Let me see if I actually have the exact cost of these, or near exact cost of this. So construction costs, metro stations. This blog post. 72nd cost 740, 86 goes to 531. This is a different set of numbers. 72nd cost 793. So I'm guessing 72nd is the one that was where maybe the reason I was puzzled is that this is the longer one. It's about 400 meters. This is the one that's 330, so it's a little bit less. This is much longer. So this is I don't know, 2 million per meter of station dig. Ridiculous. Should be a few 100,000, not many 100,000. 96th Street was 812. Now 96th was built cut and cover because 96th was where they staged the construction. And this was the biggest station of them all. How big? Well, 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 pre-exists. Parts of it do. Some of the older tunnels, although not the stations. So this part pre-exists, 99 to 105, and then this is supposed to be a station to be built as part of Phase 2. And I'm forgetting, I think this pre-exists to some extent. So to connect to the pre-existing part, they started in 99th. And because of issues with the geology changes abruptly from hard schist on the Upper East Side to softer soil in Harlem. And to avoid having to build a tunnel boring machine for both kinds, they just built this entire stretch cut and cover. 570 meters. Right, it's not even a matter of bare bones minimalistic, remember. You, the passenger, do not get to use the extra platform length. It's back of the house space. It's it's like office space for workers. And I gotta tell you something. The cost of putting office space in those buildings on 2nd Avenue is less than that by more than a full order of magnitude. Yeah, the fact that it's only 2 tracks is actually good. Like the 4-track, like you should not be building 4 tracks unless you're doing the entire line cut and cover, and you're not. Right, these stations are not even that nice because the extra costs are for big stations. And the big stations are not about things that are useful for passengers. The full-length mezz is not required for passengers. The mezz is barely required. I mean, there's this claim about fire safety. First of all, they have the same fire safety code in Spain and in Turkey, but also more importantly, you don't need full length mez for the fire escapes. You just need You just need there to be a mez level at every exit, so you can absolutely do mez, a little bit of back office, mez, a little bit of back office, mez, and then platform underneath, and that's going to be fine. You're going to have less back office space, but that's fine. You don't need that much back office space. If it's that important, and it's not, put it above ground. Hire like these buildings on Second Avenue that are commercial. And so at any rate, when you do cut and cover, 7 blocks, 570 meters, with a lot of utility relocation, but that did not cost 2 million per this. This cost more like 1.5. Maybe even a bit less. So there's something like a 40% extra, just judging by this. Maybe a bit more when you count the launch boxes, maybe 50% just for mining the stations. That was bad by itself. But on top of that, they mined twice as much as they needed to. This is what they did wrong, because Ops said we need the backspace. No, you don't, you hacks. The excavation. So we're talking here around Paris. The excavation is not much more. Yeah, it is not much less. But sometimes, but even these numbers are excessive. And honestly, this is also kind of excessive. Maybe it's because it's the RER, so it's long stations. But this should be more like 80,000, not 160. So yeah, the unit. Who are they putting? I don't even know who they're putting. Who they're putting up there. I mean, it's not even at 96th Street, which is a terminus, so maybe workers need to have break rooms there. I mean, maybe it's for the station agents, but there aren't that many station agents. There shouldn't be station agents. So, you don't. Yeah, it's not. It's much bigger than a 2-bedroom apartment. It's many thousands of square meters. It would not fit in just one level of the footprint of the station, which is, or maybe it barely would. There's much more back office space than passenger circulation space, and this is something that you even see in the most constrained spaces. Penn Station's lower concourse, I believe half of it is either back of office or concessions, rather than circulation, and they've never thought about kicking that out to improve circulation, because Penn Station is supposed to be too cramped or something. So yeah, all of this is just this kind of bullshit over design. So remember, in New York, for New York specifically, I wasn't intending to do this about New York, but it's useful to just bag what New York is doing poorly, because it's the worst in the world, by far. So factor of 2 adjust from over-designed, more than 2 actually, because twice the dig, and they're using the wrong techniques. So maybe almost a factor of 3 just due to bullshit overbuilding. Procurement doubles. That's a factor of 6 already. Labor, so soft costs are very high. They're 2x. Maybe they're a little bit less for a big project, where they should be 1.1x. And again, now some of these soft costs are things like contingencies, which are really a procurement problem. So let's call it 1.5x on the white collar overstaffing. The blue collar overstaffing also adds something similar. I mean, remember, most of the costs are not labor. In the United States, labor is 40 to 50% of the cost. It's 20-something% in Sweden or in Turkey or in Italy. So if you're overstaffing and you're overpaying, I mean, yeah, that might be for sections of the workers, it might be 4x. Overall, it might be 1.5 or 2x, but most of the costs are not labor. So if it's 50-50, that's 1.5x overall. So we have a couple of 1.5x. We have 3 on the lower building, which is very unique to this. We have 2x on the procurement, which is for every project in New York. By the way, other projects in New York, we also have overbuilding. For example, accessibility projects that are 2 elevators per platform and on 1. Or same accessibility projects are also bundled with station repairs that are charged through the accessibility grant, because the MTA does not think accessibility is good by itself. Yes, I am struggling to think this as well, but you Prague are not a manager at an agency with about 50,000 employees that probably could, I don't want to say it could deal with, we could have only half of them because about half of that is buses, and buses are not actually overstaffed. But the subway portion, yeah, 20 something thousand employees, counting head office. I'm guessing half are redundant. Between the conductors and low maintenance productivity, yeah, you're not the head of an agency that has very high operating costs and has 20,000 employees, and neither am I. Those people think they do, or we mere people who have not wasted billions of dollars of public money every year to criticize. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Don't even kick it out to Sunnyside Yard. There are buildings around Penn Station. Rent office space at a building that's adjacent to Penn Station. Oh yeah, or yeah, this is the example. And I mean, yes, it's Manhattan office space, but first of all, you can develop by yourself, and it's still gonna, or you can pay the market rents, and it's still gonna be cheaper. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so by the way, one of the silly things that they're considering these kinds of new skyscrapers is one of the justifications for why they need to keep the back office space until they do full Penn Station reconstruction for $20 billion. At any rate, so again, usually it's a factor of 1.5 to 2 for overbuilding. This is a unique case where between the techniques and everything it's 3. Which also absorbs the utilities, because a lot of this is to avoid utility relocation. Note that the overbuilding factor for here was worked differently. A lot of it was utilities bullshit that they, for 96, that they could not avoid. Here they avoided it at an even higher cost. So let's say the utilities and overbuilding are a factor of 3 combined in New York. Procurement is 2x. Soft costs probably 1.5x. We're talking, that by itself, that's right there, 8, 9x explanation. You take New York cost, divide by about 8 or 9, what are we getting? A little bit less than the global median. Why a little bit less and not the worst? Because, okay, that may be why you can't fully pay New Yorkers Italian wages. You can pay them Swedish wages, it's fine. Here's how to do this. So, you might be able to notice that it's already getting dark because it's not June anymore, it's August. So I started recording at 7:20 and it's now 9:10. I'm going to try to end this at 9:20 and take questions. And meanwhile, I'm going to go darker and darker because the sun is setting as we speak. I mean, literally the sun's set, it's just civil twilight. I mean, the sun's below the horizon, it's just so little below the horizon that there's refraction. So are there questions about the synthesis? And I'm going to try not to answer specifically New York questions because that's something separate. But questions about like the big themes and like what's important across. And as usual, yeah, New York is especially kind of funny. New York costs are high even by American standards. On the other hand, I mean, the Greenland extension, I mean, yeah, it was about 300 million per kilometer. I shouldn't say was, and isn't fully open. It is 300 million a kilometer, but it might not sound so bad, but it's light rail. It's light rail, an existing thing, and the interagency there is with Commuter Rail. Commuter Rail thinks it's special. That project should not even have been built. It should have just been regionalized. As a summary, what are the top 5 changes for English-speaking areas? Well, it depends. So, Anglosphere in general, the modern system, build civil service, stop looking down on subject matter experts. The engineer should not be taking orders from the person who got it first at Oxford PP. I have no idea. I honestly have no idea. I don't know why earth pressure balance is useful there or not. I mean, all you can tell is Amsterdam's alluvial like Amsterdam has uniquely bad geology. I mean, yes, the Netherlands also loves privatizing the state. It privatized its universal healthcare system somehow, but they're using, but they also have terrible geology. This is every agency in America that does any kind of technical scoring. It's not that one region in America is bad at technical scoring. All of them are bad. The ENO, so ENO, the people who did this, I believe that they actually looked at technical scoring, and at no point did they find anywhere in America where A, technical scoring was used, B, at a weight higher than 30%. California is somehow the least bad at this particular thing. In general, everything is bad. Like, it's not California is bad and should learn from other parts of America. America is bad, and and California should use the fact that a lot of the state speaks Spanish, and actually use that, and like maybe learn from Spain or from a Latin American country that is not Mexico, which is by far the most Americanized, and also has some of the highest costs in Latin America. Are there other questions? And again, I'm going to give people time to type because there's a little bit of lag, and I don't see the X is typing thing that you'd see in GChat or Signal or whatever. But be mindful of time, please. And I'm going to do this just because I know that when I have a mostly white screen, like at this point it actually matters to illumination. It's going to backlight me. Like, say night mode, but this is somehow better for night mode. Is the Sweden report slated for release soon? It requires about 3 person-hours of work, maybe less. It's literally, I wrote a bibliography, now I just need to promote certain references to inline and then answer. I think Eric had 5 questions, all of which are very short, or very short answer. Things like, explain more about this. This is like literally, it's something that can plausibly be released. Maybe this week is too cramped, but next week is the Sweden report. Like essentially the link I just showed you about about the union, this one, was not incorporated into the report because I only found it after sending the previous draft. So this needs to be added. It's like 2 paragraphs, and again, it doesn't take hours to write 2 paragraphs. Will you put a link on Discord with the report? Yes, not just on Discord. Discord is for you guys, but we have much more public things like this, or the part where it's still, hi, read the Italian report and read the Istanbul report. Yeah, that's gonna also, okay, I don't know, oh, right, because it's home and not the baseline. Yeah, there's gonna be Sweden over here. Again, we're talking days, not weeks. Just by not overbuilding. So if you're counting, it depends on what you count as overbuilding. If you assume all contracting will remain stupid and the sandhogs will still have veto power, probably half. Maybe actually 30% of the reason is that if you leave a lot of money on the table, then you incentivize other people to screw you over. So these are things that somewhat interact positively with each other. Getting a better workforce, not letting the soft costs murder you, and right-sizing the stations. Are there cases where high costs have yielded better results? I mean, sure. I mean, when you have very complex archaeology, yeah, you need to spend more money on making sure that you're not going to collapse the Roman Colosseum. But other than that, I mean, generally, no. It's kind of remarkable how the kind of worst disasters are not especially cheap projects, like Line 12 in Mexico City, the one that the viaduct partially collapsed. That was not a cheap project. you don't. Like, none of this works grassroots is the problem. It's like grassroots can say things like build more or highlight poor governance, but it's something that you can't protest for this. Is the problem. Like, and Transit Matters is an advocacy group, but Transit Matters is very grass-tops, not grassroots advocacy group, and that doesn't always sit right with people who think that everything is going to look like 1960s civil rights advocacy. And that's fine. I mean, 1960s civil rights advocacy was in conjunction with things like suing various states in court to require, for example, one person, one vote redistricting. So, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for watching. I need to stop. And I will see you once again with another topic in a week. So, ciao, ciao.